The storm came without warning, as they often did in the Arizona Territory. One moment the sky stretched endlessly blue above the mesquite and palo verde. The next it turned the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of violence. Eleanor McKinley gripped the reins tighter as her wagon jolted over another rut in the trail. The mule team snorted nervously, their ears flicking back at each rumble of thunder. She'd been foolish to push on after seeing the clouds building over the Chiricahua Mountains. But the supplies in her wagon bed couldn't wait: flour, salt pork, medicine for the hired hand's children who'd come down with fever. The first fat drop splattered against the canvas covering her goods. Then came the wall of rain. She'd lived in this territory 8 years, long enough to know what flash floods could do to a person caught in an arroyo. The dry wash she'd been following suddenly roared to life, brown water churning with branches and debris. The mules screamed and lurched sideways. Easy, easy now. But her voice was lost in the crash of water and splitting wood as the wagon tilted, crashed, and threw her into the torrent. The current slammed her against rocks, tore at her skirts. She fought for air, for purchase on something solid. Her fingers found a root, lost it. The world became water and darkness and the certainty that she would die here, today, in this nameless gully 20 miles from home. Then a hand, strong as braided leather, caught her arm. She was hauled bodily from the flood, dragged up the crumbling bank, and deposited on a ledge of rock. Gasping, spitting muddy water, she looked up at her rescuer. An Apache warrior stood above her, water streaming from his long black hair. Blood seeped through a tear in his cotton shirt, spreading dark across his ribs. He pressed one hand to the wound while scanning the rising water below. Eleanor's heart hammered from the near drowning or from fear. She couldn't say. She'd heard all the stories, the raids, the killings on both sides. Just last month, the Hendersons had lost their eldest boy in a skirmish near the border. The Apache looked down at her, and she saw him making his own calculations. A white woman, alone. The kind who might have family, might have men who'd come looking with rifles and rope. "The cave," he said in accented English, gesturing to a dark opening in the rock face. "Water rises more. She could stay here and likely be swept away when the flood crested, or follow a wounded Apache into a cave." Thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire. The choice made itself. The cave was deeper than it appeared, opening into a chamber large enough to stand in. Dry sand covered the floor. Evidence of previous occupancy lay scattered about a fire ring, some pottery shards. The Apache lit a small fire with practiced efficiency, using wood and kindling stored in a natural alcove. In the flickering light, Eleanor could see him better, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35 summers. A scar ran along his left jaw. His wound still bled, soaking his shirt. "You're hurt," she said. He shrugged, then winced. "Soldier bullet. Yesterday." His dark eyes studied her. "You are the widow with the small ranch near Sulphur Springs." It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded slowly. Of course he knew. The Apache knew every water source, every homestead, every movement in their territory. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor McKinley. I am called Edison." His English name sat strangely on his tongue. "My people call me another name, but Edison for whites." She almost smiled at that. Edison, like the inventor making all those miraculous machines back east. "May I look at your wound?" Suspicion flashed across his features. She held up her hands. "My mother was a healer, back in Missouri, before Thomas had convinced her to come west, before the accident at the mine that left her a widow at 22. I know some things." He considered this, then nodded once. The bullet had gouged a furrow along his ribs, painful and bloody, but not deep. Eleanor tore strips from her petticoat, trying not to think about the impropriety of it all. She'd kept some of the medicine from the wagon in her skirt pockets, thank God for sensible frontier fashion. "This will burn," she warned, uncorking the bottle of carbolic. Edison didn't flinch as she cleaned the wound, though the muscles in his jaw tightened. Up close, she could smell sage smoke in his hair, see the careful scarification marks on his shoulders that told stories she couldn't read. "Why did you save me?" she asked as she wound the makeshift bandage around his chest. "Why does anyone save anyone?" He caught her wrist gently as she tied off the cloth. "Because the water was winning." Outside, the storm raged on. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, watching each other with the wariness of wild animals forced to share shelter. Eleanor wrung water from her skirts as best she could. Her hair hung in sodden ropes down her back. "Your family will worry," Edison said. "No family, just hired men, and they know I can take care of myself. Usually, when she wasn't being swept away by flash floods." "What about yours?" Something shifted in his expression. "My brother is dead, 3 moons ago. White ranchers said he stole cattle." His voice carried no inflection, but his hands tightened on his knees. "He was tracking a deer. They shot first." The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. Eleanor thought of all the violence that soaked into this land like blood into sand. "I'm sorry." "Your husband, the mining accident. I heard of it." She looked up sharply. He met her gaze steadily. "We hear things, see things. The mountain that ate him, we call it Hungry Rock. It has taken many." They fell silent. The storm showed no signs of abating. Water roared past the cave mouth, carrying away pieces of her livelihood, the wagon, the supplies, maybe the mules if they hadn't made it to high ground. "I should thank you," she said, "for pulling me out." "No thanks needed." "Still." She pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how far from any help. But fear wasn't what she felt. Something else. Something that had been dormant since Thomas died. "Tell me about your brother." At first, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, haltingly, he began to speak. His brother had been younger, eager to prove himself as a warrior in a time when the old ways were dying. He'd believed they could still fight, still win. "I told him the war was over," Edison said, "that we must find new ways. He called me a coward." Pain flickered across his features deeper than any bullet wound. Maybe he was right. "Surviving isn't cowardice," Eleanor said softly. "It's the hardest kind of courage there is." He looked at her across the fire, and something passed between them, understanding. Recognition. 2 people who had lost everything and somehow kept going. The night deepened. The storm began to ease, but the water still ran too high to leave safely. They shared what little food Edison had: dried meat, some piñon nuts. Their conversation wandered like smoke, touching on small things and large. She told him about Missouri, about green hills and rivers that ran year-round. He spoke of the desert's secrets, the hidden springs, the way to read weather in the flight of birds. "You speak English well," she observed. "Mission school. When I was young." His mouth twisted. "They tried to beat the Apache out of us. It didn't take..." He touched the scarification marks unconsciously. "So I learned their words, but kept my own heart." The fire burned lower. They'd need to sleep soon, to wait for dawn and lower water. The cave had grown warm, close. Eleanor became acutely aware of their proximity, of the way firelight played across his features, of her own disheveled state. "I should..." She gestured vaguely at the other side of the cave. "Eleanor." The way he said her name made her pulse quicken. "You have nothing to fear from me." "I know." And she did know, with a certainty that surprised her. "That's not what I'm afraid of." He went very still, reading the truth in her words. The air between them charged like the sky before lightning. They came together slowly, inevitably, like water finding its course. His hands were gentle but sure, hers trembling but eager. 8 years of widowhood, of sleeping alone, of being strong, all of it fell away. There was only this moment, this unlikely shelter, this unexpected grace. Later, they lay entwined on the sand, her head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. The storm had passed. Through the cave mouth, stars appeared between racing clouds. "This was not wise," he said quietly. "No." She pressed her lips to the pulse in his throat. "When has wisdom ever mattered in moments like these?" He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest, then grew serious again. "Come morning, I must go. There are patrols. If they find us together—" "I know." The world would intrude soon enough. The harsh light of day would illuminate all the impossibilities, the color of their skin, the rules of their separate worlds, the violence that simmered always between their peoples. "But we have tonight." "One night," he agreed, tightening his arms around her. "One night of truth." They loved again as the stars wheeled overhead, gentle and fierce by turns. She memorized the planes of his face, the scars that mapped his history, the way he breathed her name like a prayer. He wound his fingers in her hair, traced the calluses on her hands that spoke of a life of labor, kissed the tears that came unbidden to her eyes. Near dawn, she woke to find him dressing in the gray light. The water had receded, leaving debris and silt to mark its passage. Her wagon lay in pieces far below. He knelt beside her, pressed something into her hand, a leather cord tied with an intricate knot, a small turquoise bead worked into the design. "So, you remember—" "As if I could forget." She caught his hand, held it to her cheek. "Edison. That is not my true name." He cupped her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "My name is Abraham. It means father of nations in your tongue."
"Abraham,"
she whispered, tasting the shape of it. He kissed her once more, deep and desperate, then rose and moved to the cave mouth. "Do not follow. Do not look for me. For your safety and mine." Then he was gone, vanishing into the landscape like smoke, leaving Eleanor alone with the sunrise and the echo of her own heartbeat. She dressed slowly, mechanically, found her way down to the ruined wagon, salvaged what little she could carry. The walk home would be long and hard. She'd have to explain the loss, weather the questions, begin again. But first, she pressed the leather cord to her lips and allowed herself one moment more of remembering. One night of love with the Apache, a secret to carry beneath her breastbone like a live coal, warming her through all the cold years ahead. She didn't know then what she'd discover in a month's time. Didn't know that their one night would bear fruit, that she'd carry his child, that the path ahead would be harder than any she'd walked before. She knew only that she lived, that he lived, and that for one night they'd found something true in a world built on lies. Eleanor McKinley squared her shoulders, tied the leather cord around her neck where it would rest hidden beneath her collar, and began the long walk home. The morning sickness came like clockwork, just as the sun crested the Dragoon Mountains. Eleanor gripped the porch rail, waiting for the nausea to pass. 6 weeks since the flood. 6 weeks since the night that had changed everything. She knew what the signs meant. Her monthly courses had stopped. Her breasts were tender. And now this retching into the sage bushes while her hired man, old Pete, pretended not to notice from the corral. "A baby! Abraham's baby!" Eleanor pressed a hand to her still flat stomach and closed her eyes. How could one night, one perfect, impossible night lead to this? She was a widow, a respectable woman trying to hold on to her land. And now— "You all right? Mrs. McKinley," Pete called, concern creeping into his voice. "Fine," she managed. "Just something I ate." But she wasn't fine. She was pregnant with an Apache's child in a territory where such things could get them both killed. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of hiding and hard work. Eleanor let out her dresses, wore her late husband's oversized coats, kept to herself more than usual. When she couldn't hide it anymore, she told people the father was a traveling man who'd passed through, helped repair her barn, moved on. Some believed her. Others whispered behind their hands at the general store. It was Isabella Valdez who saved her. Eleanor's nearest neighbor, a Mexican-American widow herself, appeared at the ranch one day with a basket of food and knowing eyes. "How far along?" Isabella asked without preamble. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her swollen belly. 7 months. And the father? Eleanor said nothing, but her fingers found the hidden leather cord at her throat. Isabella's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Ah," the older woman said softly. "I see." She settled herself at Eleanor's kitchen table like she belonged there. "You'll need help when the time comes. I've delivered many babies." "Why would you?" "Because I know what it is to be alone, to be judged." Isabella's weathered face softened. "And because that baby didn't ask to be born into this mess of a world, it deserves a chance." The friendship that grew between them became Eleanor's lifeline. Isabella came by weekly with food, gossip from town, and herbs that eased the discomforts of pregnancy. She never asked about the father again. But sometimes Eleanor caught her studying the baby's movements with a thoughtful expression. Victoria was born on a cold February night in 1876, with Isabella's steady hands guiding her into the world. The moment Eleanor saw her daughter, dark hair already thick, skin the color of café au lait, those distinctive eyes, her heart cracked open and remade itself around this tiny person. "She's beautiful," Isabella whispered, wrapping the baby in clean linen. "What will you call her?" Eleanor traced her daughter's perfect features. She'd thought of safe names, English names that might help the child blend in. But looking at her now, "Victoria," she said finally. "For victory, because she's here, despite everything." Isabella smiled. Victoria McKinley, a strong name. The early years were a battle for survival, both physical and social. Eleanor threw herself into the ranch work with renewed determination. She learned to shoot, really shoot. Not just the basics Thomas had taught her. She repaired fences, dug irrigation ditches, doctored cattle. Her hands grew harder, her aim steadier, her resolve firmer. But it was the whispers that cut deepest. "Look at that child's hair," she heard Mrs. Henderson say at the general store. "Black as midnight, and those cheekbones." "The traveling man," she said. "Mrs. Finch replied. "But I wonder." Eleanor kept her chin high, bought her supplies, and left. But she saw how they looked at Victoria, like she was a curiosity, a puzzle to be solved, or worse, a problem to be dealt with. Andrew Carnegie was the first to make a real move for her water rights. The cattle baron had arrived in the territory 5 years back with deep pockets and deeper ambitions. He started small, offering to buy her out for a fair price. "I'm not selling," Eleanor told him flatly when he appeared at her door. Carnegie smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "Now, Mrs. McKinley, a woman alone with a young child, this land's too hard for you. Let me take it off your hands. You could go back east, give that girl a proper education. This is our home." "Is it?" His eyes lingered on 3-year-old Victoria, playing in the dust nearby. "Seems to me you might be happier somewhere more accepting." The threat was subtle but clear. Eleanor's hand inched toward the rifle by the door. "Get off my land, Mr. Carnegie." He tipped his hat, still smiling. "Think about my offer." After that, the troubles began in earnest. Cut fence lines, poisoned water holes, cattle disappearing in the night. Sheriff Watson, firmly in Carnegie's pocket, always seemed to be looking the other way. "It's that Apache blood," Eleanor heard him tell Carnegie once when she was in town. "Makes them wild, untrustworthy. Mark my words, that girl will be trouble." Eleanor wanted to rage, to scream that Victoria was kind and bright and perfect. that she sang to the horses and helped gather eggs and had her father's gentle heart. But she held her tongue and planned. Every slight, every threat, every challenge only hardened her resolve. The worst came during the drought of 1880. Water became more precious than gold. Carnegie had somehow acquired new maps, official ones, that showed the creek running through Eleanor's land as public waterway. "It's fraud," Isabella said, reading the legal notice. "That water's been yours for years. Doesn't matter if Watson backs him up." Eleanor watched Victoria, now 4, carefully watering the vegetable garden with a tiny bucket. Her daughter had learned conservation young. "We'll have to fight smarter." She taught herself bookkeeping, studying late into the night by lamplight. Every transaction, every water usage, every head of cattle meticulously recorded. When Carnegie's men diverted the creek upstream, she documented it. When they claimed she owed back taxes on invented assessments, she had receipts proving otherwise. But papers couldn't stop the violence when it came. The night riders hit during the September cattle drive. Eleanor heard them coming, horses at full gallop, torches blazing. She grabbed her rifle and ran for the door, shouting for Pete and the other hands. Masked men circled the ranch house, whooping like they thought Indians sounded. One threw a torch at the barn. Another shot her milk cow. "Get out, squaw lover!" someone shouted. "Take your half-breed and get out!" Eleanor fired over their heads, then lower when they didn't scatter. She winged one, heard him curse in a voice that sounded suspiciously like Carnegie's foreman. "Rhodes." "The barn," Pete yelled. Flames licked at the hay. Eleanor ran for the water buckets, but strong arms caught her from behind. She fought, twisting, biting, until a fist connected with her temple. Stars exploded across her vision. "Mama?" Victoria's scream cut through everything. Eleanor's vision cleared to see her daughter in the doorway, Isabella trying to pull her back inside. One of the riders had dismounted, was walking toward them. "No." Eleanor broke free, stumbled forward. "Don't you touch her." The man laughed. "Just want to look at the little mongrel." Eleanor's shot took his hat off. The next would have been lower if Pete hadn't appeared, scattergun in hand. "That's enough excitement for one night, boys," Pete said calmly. "Unless you want to explain to the federal marshal why you're terrorizing women and children." The riders exchanged glances. The threat of federal involvement still carried weight, even out here. They retreated, but not before one called out, "This ain't over." Eleanor held Victoria until the shaking stopped both hers and her daughter's. The barn was saved, though barely. The milk cow was dead, but they were alive. "Why did those men come?" Victoria asked, her young voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Why did they call me those names?" Eleanor's heart broke. She'd hoped to protect her daughter from this a little longer. "Because some people are afraid of what they don't understand. Because your papa—" She stopped. "How did you explain hatred to a 4-year-old? Because you're special, and that scares them." "Was my papa bad?" "No, baby, your papa was the best man I ever knew." Eleanor kissed her daughter's hair, which smelled of smoke and fear. "Someday I'll tell you all about him." The attack changed things. Eleanor no longer pretended she could weather this alone. She hired more hands, Mexican-American men Isabella vouched for, who didn't care about Victoria's parentage as long as the pay was fair. She joined forces with other small ranchers facing Carnegie's expansion. She learned the law, writing letters to territorial authorities about water theft and intimidation. And she taught Victoria to defend herself. "Hold it steady," she instructed, helping small hands grip the child-sized rifle. "Breathe out slowly. Squeeze gentle." The tin can jumped off the fence post. Victoria whooped with delight. "Good girl. Again." Some might have said she was stealing her daughter's childhood. Eleanor saw it as giving her the tools to survive in a world that would always see her as different. Victoria learned to shoot, to ride, to read the land and the sky. But she also learned kindness from Isabella, letters and numbers from Eleanor's teaching, and joy from the simple pleasures of ranch life. The seasons cycled. Eleanor's hair began showing gray at 29. Her hands grew gnarled from work, but the ranch held. The water flowed. Victoria grew strong and bright and beautiful. Then came the day in 1882 when Carnegie appeared with new ammunition. "Interesting thing," he said, standing in her doorway, uninvited. "I've been going through some old territory records. Seems there's laws about white women consorting with Indians, producing offspring." He smiled that cold smile. "Now, you've always said the father was a traveling man, but if someone were to suggest otherwise—" "Get out." Eleanor's voice was steady, but inside she shook. The child could be taken, placed in one of those schools where they civilize half-breeds. For her own good, of course. He examined his fingernails. "Unless, of course, you were to reconsider my offer." After he left, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table and cried for the first time in years. Not from weakness, but from rage, from the unfairness of it all. She'd built this life with her own hands, raised her daughter with love and strength, and still they came, circling like vultures. Isabella found her there. The older woman sat beside her, took her hand. "What will you do?" Eleanor looked out the window to where Victoria was helping Pete with the horses, 6 years old, and already a better rider than most grown men. Her daughter laughed at something Pete said, the sound carrying on the desert wind, so alive, so precious, so vulnerable. "What I've always done," Eleanor said, wiping her tears. "Fight, but smarter now, and harder." She stood, went to her desk, and began writing letters. To territorial officials, to newspaper editors, to anyone who might listen. The water rights battle was coming to a head. Carnegie had overplayed his hand with threats about Victoria. Now it was time to show him what a mother's rage could do. "One night of love with the Apache," she murmured, touching the leather cord still hidden at her throat. But the love didn't end with the night. Looking at her daughter, at the life they'd built despite everything arrayed against them, Eleanor allowed herself a fierce smile. Let them come. She'd be ready. The real fight was just beginning. The dust from the federal convoy rose like smoke signals across the desert. Eleanor stood on her porch, shading her eyes against the summer glare. 3 wagons, a dozen mounted soldiers, and in the lead, a young man in a crisp uniform who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Federal Land Survey Team," old Pete muttered from beside her. "This ought to be interesting." It had been a year since Carnegie's threats about Victoria, a year of legal battles, newspaper campaigns, and carefully documented water theft. Eleanor's persistence had finally caught someone's attention in Washington. But she hadn't expected him. The Apache scout rode alongside the convoy, his presence causing a ripple of whispers among her ranch hands. Even from a distance, Eleanor knew that way of sitting a horse, that particular tilt of the head scanning the horizon. Her heart stumbled, then raced. "Abraham?" 7 years since that night in the cave, and now here he was, close enough to see but worlds away. She forced herself to breathe normally as the convoy approached. The young federal agent dismounted first, removing his hat to reveal sandy hair and earnest blue eyes. "Mrs. McKinley, I'm Theodore Roosevelt, with the Department of the Interior. We're here about the water rights dispute." Eleanor barely heard him. Abraham had dismounted too, was standing by his horse, carefully not looking at the ranch house. He wore civilian clothes, now cotton shirt, canvas pants, but the same leather vest she remembered. His hair was shorter, streaked with premature gray. "Hey, Mrs. McKinley," Roosevelt prompted. "Yes, sorry." She forced her attention back to the agent. "Please, come inside. I have all the documentation ready." As the men filed into her home, Eleanor caught Isabella watching from the kitchen doorway. The older woman's eyes were sharp with understanding. "Victoria," Eleanor called. "Go help Mrs. Valdez with the noon meal." "But, Mama, I want to see the soldiers." "Now." Victoria. Her daughter obeyed, but not before Eleanor saw Abraham's whole body go rigid at the child's voice. He knew. Somehow, in that instant, he knew. The meeting was torture. Eleanor presented her evidence deeds, water measurements, testimony from other ranchers. Roosevelt took notes, asked intelligent questions. Sheriff Watson, who'd arrived with Carnegie's lawyer, blustered and made veiled threats. Through it all, Abraham stood silent by the door, his presence a burning weight Eleanor felt with every breath. When Roosevelt asked to examine the creek boundaries, everyone filed outside. Eleanor found herself walking near Abraham, close enough to speak, but separated by 7 years and impossible circumstances. "The widow McKinley," he said quietly, in that voice she'd never forgotten. "You've made quite a reputation, fighting Carnegie, writing to newspapers." "A woman does what she must." She kept her voice equally low. "And you working for the Federals now?" "Better than fighting them." His jaw tightened. "I help keep the peace, translate, show them water sources and trails. It's useful work." They'd reached the creek. Roosevelt was measuring, comparing maps. Sheriff Watson was arguing loudly about traditional boundaries. But Eleanor only had eyes for the moment when Victoria came running from the house, calling a question to Isabella. She saw the exact instant Abraham understood. His breath caught. His hand found the fence post for support. Those eyes, his eyes in that young face. The way she moved, fleet and sure like her father. "Eleanor," he breathed. "Not here," she managed. "Please." The rest of the survey passed in a blur. Carnegie arrived, all bluster and threats. But Roosevelt remained unmoved. The young agent might look green, but he had steel underneath. He documented everything, promised a full investigation. As the convoy prepared to leave, Abraham lingered by the barn. Eleanor found herself drawn there, unable to resist. "She's beautiful," he said simply. "What's her name?" "Victoria." "For victory." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "How old?" "6, born February of 76. He closed his eyes, calculating. When he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "Does she know?" "No, it wasn't safe. It still isn't safe." "Eleanor?" He stopped, started again. "Mary, you said your name was Eleanor." Heat flooded her cheeks.
Yes, Mary Eleanor. I go by Eleanor now. It seemed safer after that night, after everything changed."
"All these years, I looked for an Eleanor, asked after an Eleanor." His laugh was bitter. "And you were Mary McKinley all along. The whole territory knows that name." "Abraham Lincoln," he corrected quietly. "Abraham Lincoln. That's what I tell the whites now. They find it amusing. Apache with the dead president's name." Before she could respond, Roosevelt called out. The convoy was leaving. Abraham Lincoln mounted his horse with the fluid grace she remembered, but as they rode away, he looked back once. In that glance was everything they couldn't say. Eleanor stood in the dust until they disappeared, her hand pressed to the leather cord beneath her collar. "So," Isabella said behind her, "the father returns." Eleanor turned, not bothering to deny it. "He's here with the Federals. It doesn't change anything." "Doesn't it?" Isabella studied her shrewdly. "That child has been asking questions. Smart questions. How long before she puts pieces together?" That night, Eleanor found Victoria on the porch, watching stars. "Mama, that Indian man with the soldiers. He looked at me strange." Eleanor's heart clenched. "How do you mean, strange?" "Not mean strange, sad strange. Like," Victoria scrunched her face, thinking, "like when you look at Papa's picture sometimes." Eleanor pulled her daughter close. "You're imagining things, little one." But Victoria inherited more than her father's eyes. She had his stubborn streak, too. Jimmy Henderson says I look Indian. Says that's why my hair's so black. Jimmy Henderson is an ignorant boy who... Is it true? The question hung between them like a blade. Eleanor had always known this moment would come. She'd prepared speeches, explanations, gentle lies. But looking into those earnest eyes, Abraham's eyes, she found she couldn't. Your papa was a good man, she said carefully. The best man I ever knew. He saved my life once. Was he Indian? Eleanor touched the leather cord at her throat. After 7 years, she finally pulled it free, showed Victoria the intricate knot, the turquoise bead. He was Apache, she said, and you are my daughter. Both things are true. Both things are beautiful. Victoria fingered the cord with wonder. Why didn't you tell me? Because some people, too many people, wouldn't understand. They'd try to hurt us, take you away. Like Mr. Carnegie. Eleanor's throat tightened. Her daughter saw too much. Yes, like Mr. Carnegie. But the Indian man today, Lincoln, Mr. Roosevelt called him. Was he? No more questions tonight. Eleanor kissed her daughter's head. Someday, when you're older, I'll tell you everything. I promise. But secrets, once cracked, have a way of spilling open. The next morning brought news. Roosevelt's preliminary report favored Eleanor's claims. Carnegie was furious. Sheriff Watson made threats about Apache sympathizers and investigating certain parentage claims. Then Lincoln appeared at her gate. He came alone, early, when Miss still clung to the grasslands. Eleanor met him by the corral, rifle in hand out of habit. You shouldn't be here, she said. I know. He dismounted anyway, up close. She could see new lines around his eyes, a scar on his chin she didn't remember. 7 years. Mary. Eleanor, she corrected. I'm Eleanor now. 7 years, and every night I wondered, were you safe? Were you well? Did you hate me for leaving? I understood why you left. She set the rifle aside. It was the only choice. Was it? He moved closer, and she smelled sage and leather and memory. I told myself that. But when I saw her yesterday, our daughter, I knew I'd been a coward. You were keeping us safe. I was keeping myself safe. His voice turned fierce. From wanting what I couldn't have. From fighting for what was mine. The possessive words sent heat through her. She was never just yours, or mine. She's her own person, bright and brave and in danger because of what she is. Lincoln's hand found hers. Roosevelt told me about Carnegie's threats, about the raids. Mary Eleanor, you shouldn't have faced this alone. I wasn't alone. I had Isabella. I had good men working for me. I managed. You more than managed. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending sparks up her arm. You built something, fought for it. The whole territory knows Mary McKinley doesn't back down. She should pull away, should remember all the reasons this was dangerous. Instead, she found herself stepping closer. What do you want? Lincoln. Time, he said simply. I'm assigned to Roosevelt's team for the investigation. Weeks, maybe months. I want to know her, to know you who you've become, to help, if you'll let me. And when the investigation ends, when you ride away again. Pain flickered across his features. I don't know, but I'm tired of living like a ghost. Aren't you? Before she could answer, Victoria's voice carried from the house. Mama Ryder's coming! They sprang apart. Eleanor grabbed her rifle as Carnegie himself crested the rise, flanked by a dozen hard-looking men. Mrs. McKinley, Carnegie called, all false courtesy. I heard you had a visitor. Thought I'd come see for myself. His men spread out, hands near weapons. Lincoln had gone very still. That particular stillness she remembered from the cave, the stillness of a warrior deciding whether to fight. State your business, Carnegie, Eleanor said coldly. Just wanted to remind you that federal reports can be contested, especially when questions arise about the moral character of those making claims. His gaze slid between her and Lincoln, calculating. Interesting company you keep. Mr. Lincoln is here on federal business. She said, Is that what they're calling it now? Carnegie's smile was pure malice. Sheriff Watson might have questions about that. About a lot of things. That's a lovely daughter you have. Mrs. McKinley. Hate to see anything happen to her. The threat was naked now. Eleanor raised her rifle, but Lincoln moved first. Not with violence, but with words, spoken in perfect, accented English that carried its own threat. Andrew Carnegie, he said calmly. Age 45, property in Tucson, Santa Fe, 3 mistresses that your wife doesn't know about. Yet, he smiled slightly. Amazing what people say around Indian scouts. They think we don't understand, don't remember, but I remember everything. Carnegie's face went purple. You threatening me, boy? Simply observing, as you observed Mrs. McKinley's lovely daughter. Lincoln's hand rested easy on his gun belt. I serve the federal government now. Mr. Roosevelt values my observations. All of them. The 2 men locked eyes. After a long moment, Carnegie spat in the dust. This isn't over, he snarled. Not by half. But he left, his men trailing. Eleanor didn't lower her rifle until they were specks on the horizon. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Now he knows. He'll dig deeper. Let him dig. Lincoln's voice was grim. I'm done hiding in shadows while you fight alone. From the house, Victoria watched with Isabella. Her young face was solemn, taking in everything. Eleanor's heart ached for the innocence her daughter was losing, day by day. Mama, Victoria called. Is everything all right? Eleanor looked at Lincoln Abraham, the father her daughter didn't know. Looked at the land they'd all bled for. Looked at the storm brewing on the horizon of their lives. Everything's fine, she lied. Then, more truthfully, but I think it's time we talked, all of us. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Whatever came next, the secrets were ending. For better or worse, the truth would have its day. The truth, Eleanor discovered, was harder to speak than to live with. She sat Victoria down in the kitchen, Isabella standing guard by the window. Lincoln. She still struggled to think of him by that name, waited outside. She'd asked him to give her time alone with their daughter first.
You wanted to know about your papa,
Eleanor began, her throat tight. Victoria nodded solemnly, those dark eyes, his eyes fixed on her mother's face. Eleanor pulled out the leather cord, ran her fingers over the knots. His name was Abraham. He was Apache, and he... How did you tell a 7-year-old that her very existence was considered a crime by some? He saved my life during a flood. We spent one night together, sheltering from a storm. Just one night. And then I came. 9 months later, yes, Eleanor managed to smile. The best gift that night could have given me. Victoria absorbed this with the steady thoughtfulness that marked her as different from other children. The man yesterday, Lincoln, is he? Eleanor's breath caught. What makes you ask that?
His eyes.
Victoria touched her own face. When I look in the mirror, I see his eyes looking back. Sometimes Eleanor forgot how perceptive her daughter was. Yes, Lincoln is Abraham. Your father. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, why did he leave? The question she dreaded most. To keep us safe. If people knew about us, about him, they would have... Eleanor chose her words carefully. They would have tried to hurt us, take you away. So he left, and I told everyone your papa was someone else. You lied. The accusation stung because it was true. Yes, I lied, to protect you. Does he want me now that he's back? Eleanor's eyes filled.
Oh, my darling girl. He never didn't want you. He just didn't know about you until yesterday.
Victoria's composed mask cracked slightly. He didn't know. I never had the chance to tell him. By the time I knew I was carrying you, he was gone. I had no way to find him. Her daughter digested this information with painful intensity. Finally, she asked in a small voice, "Can I meet him properly?" Eleanor looked to Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. "If you want to." "I want to." Lincoln entered with the wariness of a man approaching a spooked horse. He'd removed his hat, and Eleanor saw Victoria studying the similarity in their features, the same sharp cheekbones, the same straight nose, the same way of holding themselves alert and ready. "Hello," he said softly. "Hello," Victoria replied. Then, with devastating directness, "Are you really my father?" "Yes. Why didn't you come before?" Lincoln glanced at Eleanor, then knelt to bring himself to Victoria's eye level. "I didn't know about you, your mama and I. We only had one night together before I had to leave. If I had known—" His voice roughened. "If I had known, nothing could have kept me away." Victoria studied him for a long moment. "Mama says you saved her from a flood." "She saved herself. I just helped a little." "Can you teach me things Apache things?" Surprise flickered across Lincoln's features. "If your mother allows it, and if you want to learn." "I want to know where I come from," Victoria said with quiet dignity beyond her years. "All of where I come from." That was how it began, carefully, quietly, with Lincoln visiting when he could slip away from the federal team. He taught Victoria to read signs in the earth, to move silently through the brush, to understand the language of birds. Eleanor watched them together and felt her heart crack and mend and crack again. But secrets, once revealed, spread like wildfire. That Apache scout's been spending considerable time at the McKinley place. Sheriff Watson observed to Carnegie one day in town, his voice carrying to where Eleanor stood in the general store. As he now, Carnegie's tone was silk over steel. "How interesting. And here I thought Mrs. McKinley's paramour was a traveling man, long gone." Eleanor kept shopping, but her hands trembled as she selected flour. Behind the counter, "Mr." Jameson wouldn't meet her eyes. The whispers started small, glances that lingered too long, conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Then came the signs. Someone painted Apache lover on her barn one night. Her fences were cut 3 times in a week. Dead animals appeared on her porch, coyotes, snakes, once a hawk with its wings spread like a grotesque angel. "We should go to Roosevelt," Lincoln said, standing over the latest offering. "This is intimidation." "With what proof?" Eleanor kicked the dead rattlesnake off her porch. "Watson won't investigate his own allies." But worse than the threats was watching Victoria navigate the sudden coldness of children who'd once been friends. Eleanor found her daughter crying behind the chicken coop after a trip to town. "Susie Henderson says she can't play with me anymore," Victoria sobbed. "Says her mama won't allow it, says I'm unnatural." Eleanor held her daughter, fury burning in her chest. "You are perfect exactly as you are. Then why does everyone hate us now?" There was no good answer to that. Isabella became their constant ally, fierce in her protection. When the Mexican-American families in the area learned of the harassment, they quietly closed ranks around Eleanor's ranch. Her workers' men who understood what it meant to be outsiders stood guard in shifts. It was Isabella who helped Eleanor make a decision that would have seemed impossible months before. "You need to make it official," the older woman said over coffee one evening. "This dancing in shadows only gives them power." "Make what official?" "Him, Lincoln, your connection to him." Isabella's eyes were steady. "They're using the uncertainty against you, spreading whatever stories suit them, take control of the narrative." "You're suggesting I—" "What, marry him?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "An Apache and a white woman, it's illegal in half the territory. Not in the federal territories. not under certain circumstances. Isabella leaned forward.
I've been asking around, quietly. There are ways.
Eleanor stared at her friend.
Even if there were, Lincoln has his own life, his work with the government. I can't ask him to. Have you tried?
That night, after Victoria was asleep, Eleanor found Lincoln by the creek. He often came there in the evenings, watching the water that had brought them together.
Isabella thinks we should make things official,
she said without preamble.
She thinks it would protect Victoria if there were papers.
Lincoln was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I dream about you. Eleanor's breath caught. 7 years of dreams, he continued, not looking at her. I tried to forget. Took a Chiricahua wife, a good woman, respected. It lasted 1 season. She said my spirit lived elsewhere, and she was tired of competing with a ghost. He turned to face her then, and the raw longing in his eyes made her knees weak. I would marry you tomorrow if I could, he said. But what kind of life would that be, a federal scout gone for months, returning to find you fighting battles that my presence only makes worse?
As opposed to now,
Eleanor laughed shakily.
At least Victoria would have a legal father.
At least there would be something official to point to when they come with their threats. And when my commission ends, when I'm just another Apache in a territory that wants us dead or disappeared.
Eleanor stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth.
Then we face that together, like we should have from the beginning. He caught her hands. Eleanor Mary, you don't know what you're asking.
Don't I?
She pulled one hand free, touched his face. I've raised our daughter alone for 7 years. Fought Carnegie, Watson, the whole territory. I've been spit on, threatened, shot at, all for the crime of loving you for 1 night. So tell me, Abraham, what exactly do I not understand about what I'm asking? He turned his face into her palm, pressed his lips there. You humble me.
I don't want to humble you. I want to stand beside you.
They were married 3 weeks later in a quiet ceremony at the federal outpost, Roosevelt himself serving as witness. It wasn't legal by territorial law, but federal recognition carried its own weight. Victoria stood between them, solemn and proud, holding the ring's simple silver bands that Lincoln had traded for with turquoise he'd carried for years. The news exploded across the county like dynamite.
She actually did it.
Eleanor heard Mrs. Finch gasp at the general store.
Married that savage, in front of God and everyone.
It ain't legal, Watson snarled to anyone who'd listen.
Ain't natural and ain't legal, and I'll see them run out of this territory if it's the last thing I do.
But Carnegie was quieter, more dangerous. He began a new campaign, legal challenges to the marriage, petitions about Victoria's welfare, claims that Eleanor was an unfit mother exposing her child to moral degradation. Roosevelt, bless him, fought back with federal authority. His investigation into water rights had uncovered a web of corruption that went all the way to the territorial capital. Carnegie was too busy defending his illegal claims to press the marriage issue as hard as he might have. Still, the pressure mounted. Eleanor woke one night to find Lincoln sitting by Victoria's bed, watching their daughter sleep.
What is it?
She whispered. A man came to the federal camp today, offered me money to disappear, said my presence here was causing disruption. Eleanor's blood chilled.
How much? More than I'll see in 10 years of scouting.
He touched Victoria's hair gently. He said to think of my family. The irony. You're not considering. No. The word was firm. Never again. But Eleanor, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that? She moved to stand behind him, rested her hands on his shoulders. We've weathered storms before. Not like this. He covered her hand with his. Before, you were a respectable widow fighting for water rights. Now you're the white woman who married an Apache, who bore his child. In their eyes, you've crossed an unforgivable line. Then we'll draw new lines. Victoria stirred, opened sleepy eyes.
Papa?
The word, spoken so naturally, made Lincoln's breath catch. He'd been teaching her Apache words along with woodcraft, and she'd taken to calling him Papa in both languages. "Sleep, little bird," he murmured in Apache, just checking the nest. She smiled and drifted back to sleep. Eleanor thought of all the nights she'd sat this same vigil alone, all the times Victoria had asked about her father, all the years of careful lies and half-truths. Whatever came next, at least they faced it as a family. The first legal challenge came within a month. A petition claiming Eleanor was exposing her child to dangerous influences. The federal judge, not Watson's tame territorial court, threw it out. But more followed, challenges to the marriage validity. Claims that Victoria should be placed in an Indian school for her own welfare. Each beaten back, but each costing money and energy they couldn't spare. Then came the night that changed everything. Eleanor woke to the acrid smell of smoke. Fire, but not from their hearth. She shook Lincoln awake just as the first shouts came from outside. The barn was ablaze, flames already licking at the roof. But this was no accident. Riders circled the property, torches raised. Eleanor recognized Watson's deputy, several of Carnegie's men. They weren't bothering with masks this time. "Get Victoria," Lincoln commanded, already reaching for his rifle. "Get to the root cellar." I'm not hiding while—" "Eleanor," his voice cracked like a whip. "Our daughter comes first. Go!" She ran for Victoria's room while Lincoln burst out the front door, firing into the air. The riders scattered but didn't flee. They wanted the family to see them, to know who was responsible. Eleanor found Victoria already awake, Isabella with her. The older woman had entered through the back, her own rifle in hand.
"The cellar,"
Eleanor gasped. "We need—" Glass shattered. A torch sailed through the broken window, catching the curtains. Victoria screamed. Eleanor grabbed the wash basin, doused the flames before they could spread. Outside, gunfire erupted. Not warning shots, now the real thing. "Stay down." Eleanor pushed Victoria behind the bed, then crept to the window. Lincoln had taken cover behind the water trough, picking his shots carefully. 2 riders were down, their companions dragging them away. But more were coming, and the barn fire was spreading to the corral fencing. Eleanor sighted down her rifle, breathed out slowly, squeezed. A rider cursed and clutched his shoulder. "That's my girl," Isabella muttered, firing from the other window. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then, as sudden as thunder, hoofbeats from the east. Roosevelt's voice, amplified by military command, "Federal marshals, drop your weapons." The raiders scattered like quail. In minutes, it was over, leaving only the crackle of flames and the bitter taste of smoke. Lincoln appeared in the doorway, blood on his shirt, not his own. Eleanor realized with relief. His eyes found Victoria first, then her. "Are you hurt?" they asked in unison. "Despite everything?" Eleanor laughed shaky, bordering on hysterical, but genuine. "We're becoming predictable." Roosevelt entered, his young face grim. "Is everyone all right?"
"Alive,"
Eleanor confirmed. She pulled Victoria close, feeling her daughter tremble. "That's what matters." "This ends now," Roosevelt said flatly. "I have enough evidence to arrest Carnegie, Watson, the whole corrupt bunch. They overplayed their hand tonight." But as Eleanor watched the barn collapse in a shower of sparks, she wondered if anything really ended, or if they just found new shapes, like smoke reforming on the wind. "We could leave," Lincoln said quietly, reading her thoughts. "Start over somewhere else." Eleanor looked at the ranch she'd fought for, the land she'd bled for, then at Victoria Brave. Brilliant Victoria, who deserved better than to run. Finally at Lincoln, who'd come back despite everything. "No," she said firmly. "This is our home, our stand. If we run now, they win." Isabella smiled grimly. That's the Mary Eleanor I know. Roosevelt was already organizing his men, preparing arrests. Dawn would bring a reckoning legal papers and handcuffs instead of torches and masks. Eleanor stood with her family, watching their barn burn, and made a promise. They'd rebuild stronger, together, and anyone who tried to tear them apart again would learn what it meant to face not just a desperate widow, but a united family. One night of love, she murmured, echoing the words that had haunted her for 7 years. Lincoln heard, pulled her close. No, he corrected. A lifetime, however long or short, a lifetime. Victoria pressed between them, small arms trying to encompass both parents. Around them, smoke rose to meet the stars, carrying away old fears and secret shames. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight they were together, and that was its own victory. The truth had set them free. Now they just had to survive it. Roosevelt proved as good as his word. By noon the next day, Sheriff Watson sat in his own jail cell, charged with corruption and conspiracy. Carnegie's arrest took longer. He had friends in high places and lawyers aplenty, but the federal net was closing. Eleanor stood in the ashes of her barn, calculating losses. Half their winter hay gone, tools destroyed, the milk cow and 2 horses dead from smoke. But they were alive, and that counted for more than property. We'll rebuild, Lincoln said beside her. He'd been up since dawn, organizing the Mexican-American neighbors who'd come to help. Stronger this time, stone foundation. With what money? Eleanor kicked at a charred beam. The legal fights had drained their reserves. And now this. There are ways. He touched her shoulder. I still have my federal pay, and Roosevelt says there might be reparations, once the trials are done. Eleanor wanted to lean into his strength, but pride kept her stiff. I've been taking care of this ranch for 8 years. I won't start living off my husband's wages now. Lincoln studied her with those dark, knowing eyes. Is that what we are, husband and wife? Or are we still 2 people circling each other, afraid to truly join our lives? The question stung because it struck true. Even married, even with him here every night, Eleanor held parts of herself separate. Old habits of independence died hard. I don't know how to be different, she admitted quietly. I've been alone so long. Then we learn together. He gestured at the neighbors already clearing debris. Look, we're not alone anymore. He was right. The attack had galvanized the community in unexpected ways. Families who'd shunned them before now arrived with tools and food. Not everyone plenty still watched from afar with suspicious eyes, but enough. Isabella coordinated the efforts with military efficiency. The Morenos will bring timber, she announced. The Sanchez family has spare nails. Old Pete's rounding up anyone who can swing a hammer. Young Theodore Roosevelt himself appeared mid-morning, sleeves rolled up. Thought I'd lend a hand before heading back to make my report. Many hands make light work, as my mother says. Even Victoria helped, small hands sorting salvageable nails from the ashes. She worked beside the Moreno children, who seemed unbothered by the heritage that made others whisper. But not everyone approved of the solidarity. Disgraceful. Eleanor overheard Mrs. Henderson telling Mrs. Finch at the general store later that week. All those Mexicans and Indians swarming over the McKinley place. You'd think she'd have more pride. High pride? Eleanor stepped around the corner, making both women jump. Pride doesn't rebuild barns. Ladies, good neighbors do. Mrs. Henderson flushed but lifted her chin. Christian neighbors would be more appropriate than the people who came when my barn burned while your Christian neighbors stayed home. Eleanor let her voice carry to the other shoppers. Interesting definition of Christianity you have. She made her purchases and left, but the interaction reminded her that not all battles were won with federal marshals and court orders. The real test came 2 weeks later. Eleanor was teaching Victoria her letters at the kitchen table when hoofbeats announced visitors. Through the window, She saw 3 men in Eastern suits dismounting. Lincoln appeared from the half-rebuilt barn, rifle casual in his hands. The lead suit, a thin man with pomaded hair, held up papers. In Mrs. McKinley. I'm Cornelius Vanderbilt, attorney at law. I represent certain interests concerned about the welfare of the minor child, Victoria McKinley. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. State your business, Mr. Vanderbilt. I have here a petition, filed in federal court, requesting that said child be removed from this environment and placed in the Phoenix Indian School for proper education and moral guidance. Over my dead body. The words came out low. Dangerous. Vanderbilt smiled thinly. That can be arranged through legal channels. I assure you, the petition argues that the child is being raised in a degraded environment, exposed to inappropriate influences. Her parents, Lincoln's voice cut like a blade. An illegal union between a white woman and a savage. Vanderbilt corrected primly. The federal recognition of such unions is currently being challenged in higher courts. Moreover, the child's mixed blood requires special consideration. Get off my land. Eleanor's hands shook with rage. I'm simply serving legal papers. Madam, you have 30 days to respond. I suggest you find competent representation. He placed the papers on the porch rail. Good day. After they left, Eleanor sank into a chair. The papers clutched in trembling hands. Indian schools. She'd heard the stories. Children stolen from families, forbidden their language, their culture, their names, beaten for being who they were. They won't take her, Lincoln said fiercely. I'll disappear with her first, take her to Mexico, to my mother's people in the mountains. No, Eleanor forced steel into her voice. No more running, no more hiding. We fight this like everything else with truth and law and persistence. But finding a lawyer willing to take their case proved nearly impossible. The territorial lawyers wanted nothing to do with it. Even Roosevelt, sympathetic as he was, had limited influence in custody matters. It was Isabella who found their salvation. There's a woman in Tucson, she said, arriving breathless from a trip to town. Clara Barton. She's been defending Mexican land grants, Indian rights. People say she's brilliant and fearless. Clara Barton turned out to be a small, fierce woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to their story in silence, reviewed the papers, then smiled like a wolf. Carnegie's behind this, of course. Can't get you on water rights. So he's trying another angle. She tapped the papers. But he's made mistakes. Several, actually. What kind of mistakes? Eleanor leaned forward. First, jurisdiction. This should be heard in territorial court, not federal unless we can prove interstate commerce is involved, which, given Carnegie's business interests, we can. Second, the Phoenix School Charter specifically states voluntary enrollment. No court order can force attendance. Third, her smile widened. You were legally married under federal authority. Any challenge to that marriage must go through federal appeals, which takes years. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt hope spark. Clara Barton proved worth her reputation. She filed counter-motions, depositions, injunctions, a legal storm that made Vanderbilt sputter and rage. She brought in witnesses to testify about Eleanor's character as a mother, the ranch's prosperity, Victoria's excellent education. The child reads at a third-grade level. Clara announced in court. She speaks 2 languages, 3 if you count Spanish. She can cipher, write, identify 30 medicinal plants, and ride better than most adults. What exactly would the Phoenix School teach her that her parents haven't? But the opposition fought dirty. Stories appeared in newspapers about the Apache's white woman and her half-breed child. Someone left a mutilated doll on their porch, face painted brown, a tiny noose around its neck. Victoria found it first, and her scream brought Eleanor running. Why do they hate me so much? Victoria sobbed in her mother's arms. Eleanor had no good answer. How did you explain hatred to a 7-year-old? How did you protect her from the world's cruelty while preparing her to face it? Lincoln took a different approach. That evening, he sat with Victoria by the fire, teaching her to weave patterns with string and old Apache game. "People fear what they don't understand," he said quietly. "You are something new, neither fully Apache nor fully white, but something else, something that hasn't existed before. Is that bad? No, but new things frighten people who like the world to stay in neat boxes." His fingers moved surely, creating complex patterns. "You know what the Apache say about fear?" Victoria shook her head. "That it's just another weather. It comes. It goes. What matters is how you stand in the storm." The legal hearings began in September. Clara had managed to get the case before a federal judge in Tucson neutral ground, away from local prejudices. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best dress, Victoria in clean calico, Lincoln in his Federal Scout uniform with every medal and commendation displayed. The courtroom was packed. Carnegie sat with Vanderbilt, looking confident. Watson was there too, out on bail, his badge gone but his sneer intact. Behind them, rows of townspeople come to gawk at the spectacle. But Eleanor's side had supporters too. Isabella and the Mexican-American families. Roosevelt, in full uniform. Even some Apache scouts Lincoln served with, standing silent witness in the back. Vanderbilt opened with passionate arguments about Christian duty, proper education, the dangers of mixed-race children growing up without civilizing influences. He painted a picture of Eleanor as a fallen woman, Lincoln as a dangerous savage, their union as an abomination. Clara destroyed him methodically. "Mr. Vanderbilt speaks of Christian duty," she said, voice carrying clearly. "Yet where was Christian charity when Mrs. McKinley's barn burned, when her fences were cut, when dead animals appeared on her doorstep?" She gestured to the Mexican-American families. "These good Catholics came to help. These savages rebuilt what Christian neighbors destroyed." She called witness after witness. Isabella testified about Eleanor's devotion as a mother. Old Pete described Victoria's intelligence and kindness. Roosevelt himself took the stand, praising Lincoln's service to the federal government and the family's courage under persecution. Then Clara called Victoria. Eleanor's heart clenched as her daughter took the stand, small and grave in her best dress. Vanderbilt objected children shouldn't testify in custody cases, but the judge overruled him. "Victoria," Clara said gently, "tell the court about your typical day." Victoria's voice started soft but grew stronger. She described morning chores, lessons with her mother, Apache words and tracking with her father, reading time, arithmetic, helping Isabella with younger children. Her testimony painted a picture of a rich, full life, surrounded by love and learning. "And are you happy?" Clara asked finally. Victoria's eyes found her parents. "The happiest," she said firmly. "I have a mama who teaches me to be strong and a papa who teaches me to be wise. What more could anyone want?" Even the judge smiled at that. But Vanderbilt wasn't finished. In cross-examination, he pushed harder. "Don't you want to be with other children like you, other mixed children who understand?" "I understand myself," Victoria replied. "Papa says understanding others starts there." "Your papa is Apache. Doesn't that make you different, lesser?" Lincoln started to rise, but Eleanor caught his arm. "Trust their daughter." Victoria straightened. "My papa served the United States Army with honor. He speaks 4 languages. He can track a butterfly across stone and read tomorrow's weather in today's clouds. If that's lesser, I'd hate to see greater." Laughter rippled through the Apache scouts. Even some townspeople smiled. The judge retired to chambers. An hour passed. 2. Eleanor gripped Lincoln's hand so tight her knuckles went white. Finally, the judge returned. "In the matter of the custody of Victoria McKinley," Eleanor stopped breathing. "This court finds no evidence of neglect, abuse, or unfitness. The child is intelligent, well-educated, and clearly loved. The petitioners have failed to prove that removal would serve the child's best interests. He looked at Carnegie and Vanderbilt with clear distaste. Moreover, this court is troubled by evidence of harassment and intimidation surrounding this case. I'm recommending further investigation into conspiracy charges. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Eleanor pulled Victoria into her arms, tears streaming. Lincoln wrapped them both in his embrace, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "We won," Victoria breathed. "We really won. This battle." Eleanor said, "There will be others. There always are." But for now, they had victory, and each other, and the long road home to a ranch that needed rebuilding, a life that needed living, a future that despite everything looked brighter than it had in years. On the courthouse steps, Carnegie pushed past, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think you've won, I'll see you broken, all of you." "And, Mr. Carnegie," Clara Barton said pleasantly, "I believe the federal marshals are looking for you. Something about falsified documents in your water claims. You might want to attend to that." Carnegie paled and hurried away. Eleanor looked at her family, her Apache husband, her mixed daughter, their Mexican-American friends, the scattered Apache scouts, the young federal agent who'd risked his career to help them. Not the family she'd imagined as a young bride heading west, but family nonetheless. "Let's go home," she said. As they rode out of Tucson, Victoria nestled between her parents on the wagon seat. Eleanor thought about battles won and battles yet to come. The territory wouldn't change overnight. Mind wouldn't suddenly open. But here, now, they'd carved out a space to exist, to love, to be. The sun set behind them, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Ahead, the ranch waited damaged but not destroyed, tested but not broken, like them. "Mama," Victoria asked sleepily, "will people always hate us?" Eleanor exchanged glances with Lincoln over their daughter's head. "Not everyone, little bird," he said. "And those who do, that's their burden to carry, not ours." "We'll teach them," Victoria murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Show them we're not scary, just different." Out of the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought. Maybe that was the answer, not grand legal battles or federal interventions, but the slow, patient work of living their lives openly, honestly, with grace under pressure and love despite hate. One family at a time, one neighbor at a time, one day at a time. The stars came out as they rode, mapping their way home through the darkness. Eleanor had learned to navigate by those stars during her years alone. Now she had other guides, Lincoln's steady presence, Victoria's bright spirit, the community that had finally embraced them. The road was long. The fight wasn't over. Carnegie would regroup. Others would take up his banner of hate. But tonight they were together. They were free. And they were going home. For now, that was enough. That was everything. The moon hung low and orange over the desert. A harvest moon that turned the landscape into a realm of copper shadows and silver light. Eleanor woke to the sound of horses, too many horses, moving too fast for honest business at this hour. Lincoln was already reaching for his rifle. "How many?" Eleanor peered through the window. 20, maybe more. They're surrounding the house. "Get Victoria. Get to the root cellar." "I'm not leaving you to—" Glass shattered. A torch arced through the broken window, followed by another. Lincoln kicked the first into the fireplace. Eleanor doused the second with the wash water. "Mama," Victoria appeared in her nightgown. Isabella right behind her with her own rifle. "The cellar," Eleanor commanded. But even as she spoke, she heard boots on the back porch. They were surrounded. "McKinley!" Carnegie's voice boomed from outside. "Or should I say, Lincoln, come out, and we'll make this quick. Stay in, and we burn you out like the vermin you are." Lincoln checked his ammunition. Eleanor did the same. Isabella muttered prayers in Spanish while loading her rifle.
Mr. Carnegie,
Eleanor called back. You're violating federal injunction by being on my property. Leave now. And
gunfire erupted, shattering more windows. Victoria screamed.
Enough talk, Carnegie roared. Boys, burn it all, every building, every fence post, time to clean this territory of Apache lovers once and for all. The night exploded into chaos. Torches flew from all directions. Lincoln fired from the front windows while Eleanor took the back. Isabella guarded Victoria, shooting at anyone who came too close to their position. The new barn. Eleanor saw flames licking at the structure they just rebuilt. Months of community labor going up in smoke. Again. But this time, Carnegie had overplayed his hand. Because this time they weren't alone. A different sound cut through the gunfire, war whoops, but not from Carnegie's men. Apache riders burst from the darkness. Lincoln's scout brothers who'd been camped nearby. Behind them came the Mexican-American families, armed and angry. "For the McKinleys!" someone shouted in Spanish. The tide turned in seconds. Carnegie's hired thugs, expecting to terrorize one family, found themselves caught between Apache warriors and furious neighbors. The attacking riders scattered, firing wildly. Eleanor saw Carnegie himself trying to flee, spurring his horse toward the hills. Without thinking, she burst out the door, rifle raised. "Carnegie!" He turned in the saddle, saw her, and made a fatal mistake. He drew his pistol, aimed at her. Lincoln's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Eleanor's shot a heartbeat later knocked the gun from his hand. Carnegie hit the ground hard, clutching his shoulder, screaming curses.
"Mama, look out!"
Victoria's warning came just in time. Eleanor spun to see Carnegie's foreman, Rockefeller, rising from behind the water trough, rifle aimed. But before Eleanor could react, another shot cracked out. Rockefeller staggered, clutching his side. Behind him stood a figure Eleanor recognized with shock. Josiah Rockwell, one of Carnegie's own gunmen, smoking rifle in hand. "That's enough," Rockwell said quietly. "There's been enough killing over water and hate." The battle was over as suddenly as it had begun. Carnegie's men fled or surrendered. The barn was saved, though scorched, and Carnegie himself lay groaning in the dust, defeated at last. As dawn broke, the full scope of their victory became clear. Not just the battle, but something larger. The community that had rallied to their defense stood firm, Apache, Mexican, even some Anglos who'd finally seen Carnegie's tyranny for what it was. Roosevelt arrived with federal marshals just as the sun crested the mountains. He surveyed the scene. Carnegie in custody, wounded but alive, the mixed defenders of the ranch, the evidence of the night's violence. "Well," he said dryly, "I suppose this simplifies the conspiracy charges." But the cost was still being counted. 2 of the Apache scouts were wounded. One of the Moreno boys had taken a bullet in the leg. And Isabella. Eleanor found her friend sitting on the porch, pressing a bloody cloth to her arm. "Isabella, why didn't you say—" "Hush, it's nothing, barely a graze." But her face was pale. "Is Victoria safe?" "Thanks to you. Thanks to all of you." Isabella smiled weakly. "That's what family does." The doctor came, tended wounds, shook his head at the violence. When will this territory learn to solve problems with law instead of lead? When the law serves all people equally. Lincoln answered quietly. Carnegie was taken away in chains, raging about lawyers and connections. But his power was broken. The water rights case collapsed without him to push it. Sheriff Watson, already in custody, faced additional charges for allowing the attack. In the days that followed, something shifted in the territory. The mixed group who defended the ranch became a symbol not of division, but of what cooperation could achieve. Stories spread of Apache warriors fighting alongside Mexican farmers, of a white woman who'd faced down a cattle baron, of a mixed child whose courage had alerted defenders at a crucial moment. Not everyone approved. There would always be those who saw mixing as pollution, difference as threat, but their voices grew quieter, outnumbered by those tired of blood and hatred. "We did it," Eleanor said one evening, watching the sunset with Lincoln. "We really did it." "The fighting's done," he agreed. "Now comes the harder part, which is living, building something that lasts." He pulled her close, making a world where Victoria can be herself without apology. Eleanor thought of all they'd sacrificed, all they'd endured. Was it worth it? Lincoln was quiet for a long moment. "Ask me in 20 years, when our daughter is grown, when she's free to choose her own path without hiding who she is, then I'll tell you if it was worth it." But looking at Victoria helping Isabella, arm in a sling but spirit unbroken, feed the chickens, Eleanor already knew the answer. Every bruise, every battle, every sleepless night had led to this: a family whole, a community united, a future possible. The ranch bore scars, bullet holes in the walls, scorch marks on the new barn, graves on the hillside for those lost along the way. But it stood. They stood. "Mama," Victoria called. "Isabella says I can help her make tamales for the celebration." "What celebration?" Eleanor called back. "The one we're having for everyone who fought for us. Isabella says we need." "How many dozen?" "Tia." 20 dozen at least," Isabella answered, laughing. "Maybe 30. It seems we have a very large family now." Eleanor looked around at their land, their hard-won, blood-bought, legally secured land. At the Apache scouts who'd made camp near the creek, planning to stay until certain all danger had passed. At the Mexican-American neighbors already organizing repair parties. At Lincoln, her husband-in-law and Truth, standing solid beside her. "Yes," she said softly, "we have a very large family indeed." That night, as promised, people gathered, Apache drums mixed with Mexican guitars. Children played together in the dust, boundaries forgotten in the universal language of childhood games. Victoria moved between groups, translating languages, bridging worlds with the ease of one born to it. "She's going to be something special," Isabella observed, watching Victoria teach Apache string games to the Moreno children. "She already is," Eleanor replied. Lincoln appeared at her side with a cup of Isabella's fierce coffee. "The scouts are talking about setting up a permanent camp near here. They say this land needs watching." "And you?" Eleanor asked. "What does Abraham Lincoln say?" He smiled, that rare, transforming expression that still made her heart skip. "I say home is where your family is, and my family is here." Clara Barton arrived near midnight, dust-covered but triumphant. "Final papers," she announced, waving a leather portfolio. "Water rights confirmed, marriage federally validated, and this is the best part: Carnegie's assets are being seized to pay damages to everyone he's harmed. You'll have enough to rebuild twice over." Eleanor took the papers with trembling hands. After all the fighting, it seemed surreal to have victory confirmed in neat legal language. "There's more," Clara continued. "The territorial government is forming a new commission on water rights and land disputes. They want a diverse board: Apache, Mexican, Anglo, Lincoln. They want you to serve." Lincoln's eyebrows rose. "Me on a government commission?" "Who better? You know the land, speak the languages, understand all sides." Clara smiled. "It's time for new voices in the territory's future." Eleanor saw the possibility dawn in Lincoln's eyes, a chance to shape policy instead of just surviving it, to build the world they wanted for Victoria through law and negotiation rather than bullets. "And," Clara added with a sly smile, "they're establishing a new school, an integrated one, where children of all backgrounds can learn together. They need a headmistress, someone with experience teaching, who believes in education for all. Eleanor's breath caught. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you've taught one brilliant mixed child. Why not teach dozens? Show this territory what's possible when we stop fearing difference and start celebrating it. The future unfolded before them like a map of unmarked trails. Dangerous still change always was. But for the first time, the paths led somewhere other than conflict. What do you think? Lincoln asked quietly. Ready for a different kind of fight? Eleanor looked at Victoria, now teaching the Apache scouts some complicated hand-clapping games she'd learned from the Mexican children. At Isabella, organizing the women into a cooking army. At the mixed gathering that would have been impossible just months ago. Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready. The party lasted until dawn. As the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold, families began drifting home, but the connections remained invisible threads binding them into something new. Carnegie was gone, his empire crumbling. Watson faced prison. The old order that had ruled through fear and division was breaking apart. In its place, something fragile but beautiful was growing. Not perfect perfection was for fairy tales, but real, rooted in shared struggle and mutual respect. Eleanor stood with her family as the last guests departed, watching the sun climb higher. The ranch was battered but not broken. The fight was won, but the work just beginning. One night of love with the Apache, she murmured, the old phrase taking on new meaning. But he came back to claim her heart years later. Lincoln finished, pulling her close, and found it had been his all along. Victoria leaned against them, tired but content. Are we done fighting now? Eleanor and Lincoln exchanged glances over their daughter's head. Done with this battle. Yes, but the war for acceptance, for justice, for the right to exist as they were, that would take a lifetime. The fighting's done for now, little bird, Lincoln said gently. Now we build. Build what? Eleanor gestured at the land around them, scarred but healing, challenged but enduring. A place where no one has to hide who they are, where love matters more than color, where water flows free and fences mark boundaries, not barriers. That sounds nice, Victoria said sleepily. Can we start tomorrow? I'm tired. They laughed, the sound carrying across the desert like a promise. Tomorrow they would begin the real work, teaching, governing, modeling what a mixed family could be, showing the territory that strength came from unity, not division. But tonight, they would rest, heroes of their own story, survivors of their own war, architects of their own future. The moon set as the sun rose, one light passing the watch to another, and the ranch stood ready for whatever came next, its walls full of bullet holes and hope in equal measure. The battle was won. The building could begin. The federal courthouse in Santa Fe stood like a fortress of justice against the December sky. Eleanor adjusted Victoria's collar one last time, her hand steadier than her heart. This was it, the final confrontation. Not with guns, but with law. Not in darkness, but in the clear light of judicial scrutiny. Remember, Clara Barton said, reviewing notes one final time. Tell the truth, all of it. The court has seen the evidence, but they need to hear it from you. Lincoln stood silent in his best suit, the formal clothes sitting uneasily on his warrior's frame. He'd testified yesterday, his words carrying the weight of years of patient observation. Now it was Eleanor's turn. The courtroom was packed. Carnegie sat at the defendant's table, his arm still in a sling from the night of the raid. Beside him, Watson in shackles, and a parade of lawyers who discovered their client's money couldn't buy everything. But it was the gallery that caught Eleanor's attention. Mixed families filled the benches. Apache married to Mexican, Anglo married to Chinese. All the hidden unions that Carnegie's trial had brought into the light. They'd come to witness, to support, to see if justice could truly be blind to color. Judge William Sherman, sent from Washington specifically for this trial, called the court to order. Mrs. Lincoln, please take the stand. The name still felt new. Mrs. Lincoln. They'd registered it properly after the raid. Federal recognition finally matching their heart's truth. State your name for the record. Mary Eleanor Lincoln, formerly McKinley. And you're here to testify about the events leading to the night of August 15th, 1884.
Yes, Your Honor, but really I'm here to testify about 8 years of terrorism.
Carnegie's lawyer objected. Sherman overruled him. Continue. Mrs. Lincoln. Eleanor began at the beginning. The cut fences, the poisoned water holes, the threats against Victoria. She spoke calmly, factually, but the courtroom could hear the steel beneath. Mr. Carnegie first approached me about selling in 1877. When I refused, he said a woman alone with a child wasn't safe in the territory. I took it as concern then. I understand now it was a threat. She detailed each escalation, each attack, each moment when the law had failed them because the law served only certain people. Clara introduced evidence as Eleanor spoke photographs of destroyed property, documented water diversions, sworn affidavits from witnesses. Then came the hard part. Tell the court about the leather cord, Clara prompted gently. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her throat. My husband gave it to me 8 years ago. The night we met, the night our daughter was conceived.
And where was this cord found?
In the effects of my late first husband, Thomas McKinley, hidden in a place only he and I knew about. Eleanor's voice stayed steady, though her heart raced. It was placed there after his death, by someone who'd been in the cave where Lincoln and I sheltered, someone who wanted me to know they'd been watching. The courtroom murmured. Sherman gavelled for silence.
And what did you conclude from this?
Eleanor looked directly at Carnegie. That my husband's death wasn't an accident. That Carnegie had him killed to clear the way for taking our water rights. And that he'd known about Lincoln and me from the beginning, saving that knowledge as a weapon. Carnegie surged to his feet. That's a lie you can't prove. Sit down, Mr. Carnegie, Sherman commanded coldly. You'll have your turn. But Carnegie's outburst had opened the door. Clara smiled like a shark scenting blood. Actually, Your Honor, we can prove it. I call Josiah Rockwell to the stand. Rockwell, Carnegie's former gunman who'd turned during the raid, took the oath with a steady hand. His testimony was damning. Carnegie's plans, laid out over whiskey and cards. The accident at the mine, carefully orchestrated. The patient stalking of a young widow, waiting for her to break or sell. He knew about her and the Apache, Rockwell said quietly. Bragged about it, said he'd use it when the time was right. Let her think she had a secret while he held all the cards. And the night of August 15th. He was done waiting, said the federal investigation was getting too close. Time to clean house, burn out the Apache lover and anyone who stood with her. Rockwell met Eleanor's eyes.
I went along until I saw the child at the window, terrified. I've done bad things, but I won't be party to terrorizing children.
Victoria's testimony came next. Clara had fought to include it, arguing that at 8, Victoria was old enough to speak her truth. Sherman had agreed.
Tell us about that night, Victoria.
Eleanor's daughter sat straight-backed, hands folded. I woke up to breaking glass. Mama told me to get down, but I could see out the window. Men on horses, throwing torches. Mr. Carnegie was shouting terrible things about my papa, about us. Were you afraid?
Yes.
Victoria's chin lifted.
But Mama and Papa weren't afraid.
So I tried to be brave too. And then our friends came, the Apache scouts, the Morenos, everyone. They came to help us. Why do you think they came? Victoria considered this with the gravity of a child who'd learned young that words mattered. Because we're family. Not all family is blood. Some family you choose. They chose us, and we chose them. Even Carnegie's lawyers looked moved. The trial continued for 3 days. Witness after witness painting a picture of systematic intimidation, corruption, attempted murder. The water rights fraud alone would have destroyed Carnegie, but combined with the rest. Lincoln testified about finding Eleanor in the flood, their one night together, the years of separation. His words were sparse but powerful, painting a picture of love constrained by prejudice, family threatened by greed. I stayed away to protect them, he said. But staying away didn't protect them. It just left them to face the danger alone. I was a coward. And now, Clara asked, now I stand with my family, whatever comes. Carnegie's defense was weak. His lawyers tried to paint him as a businessman protecting his interests, the raids as unfortunate excesses by overzealous employees. But the evidence was overwhelming. Too many witnesses, too many documents, too much blood on his hands. Watson broke on the second day, turning state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony about bribes, false reports, and looked-away violence was the final nail. On December 20th, 1884, Judge Sherman delivered his verdict. Andrew Carnegie, you are found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and violating federal water rights. You are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all territorial assets. The courtroom erupted. Eleanor sagged against Lincoln, relief making her knees weak. It was over. Really, truly over. But Sherman wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court recognizes the grave injustices perpetrated against mixed families in this territory. Let the record show that the union of Abraham Lincoln and Mary Eleanor Lincoln is valid, legal and protected under federal law. Any further harassment of this family or others like them will be met with the full force of federal justice. Outside the courthouse, snow was falling rare for New Mexico, like a blessing from the sky. Families poured out, embracing, crying, celebrating. Justice, so long denied, felt like sunshine after endless storms. We won, Victoria breathed, catching snowflakes on her tongue. We really won. Justice won. Lincoln corrected gently. We just told the truth until someone listened. Clara Barton found them in the crowd. There's more good news. The water rights settlement. Carnegie's assets are being divided among his victims. The McKinley... Excuse me? Lincoln Ranch will receive enough to secure its future for generations. Eleanor couldn't speak past the tears. That night, they stayed in Santa Fe, in a hotel that didn't question mixed couples, that welcomed all families. The snow continued falling, blanketing the world in pristine white, covering old sins and promising new beginnings. Was it worth it? Eleanor asked Lincoln as they watched Victoria sleep, peaceful at last. All the pain, all the fear. He pulled her close. Ask me when our grandchildren play freely on that ranch, when the schools teach all children together, when love doesn't need to hide. He kissed her temple. But I think we both already know the answer. They returned to the ranch to find it transformed. The community had been busy. New fences, painted barn, a sign at the gate. Lincoln Ranch, all families welcome. The Apache scouts had built a permanent camp by the creek. The Morenos were expanding their own operation, no longer afraid of Carnegie's retaliation. Roosevelt met them at the gate, grinning broadly. Welcome home, hope you don't mind. But we took the liberty of some improvements while you were gone. Theodore, Eleanor said warmly. How can we thank you? By living well, by showing this territory what's possible when fear loses and love wins. He tipped his hat. I'm heading back to Washington soon, but I'll be watching your progress, this mixed school, this new water commission you're building the future here. That evening, the ranch filled with neighbors come to celebrate. Isabella, arm healed but scarred, orchestrated a feast. The Apache scouts drummed songs of victory. The Mexican families brought guitars and good wine. Even some Anglo neighbors appeared, tentative but genuine in their congratulations. Times are changing, old Pete observed, watching children of all colors chase fireflies together. About damn time, if you ask me. Eleanor stood with her husband, watching their daughter teach a complicated string game to a mixed group of children. The leather cord, hidden for so long, now hung openly at her throat beside her wedding ring. No more secrets, no more shame. One night of love, she murmured. Started something that couldn't be stopped, Lincoln finished. Not by prejudice, not by violence, not by all Carnegie's money. Mama, Papa, Victoria ran to them, face bright with joy. Senora Moreno says I can help teach at the new school. She says I'm good with the little ones. Of course you are, Eleanor said, smoothing her daughter's hair. You've been bridging worlds since you were born. As the party continued under stars and fading snow, Eleanor felt the weight of years lifting. The fight wasn't over, might never be truly over. But tonight, they'd won something precious. The right to exist openly. The right to love without apology. The right to build a future on their own terms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The school to establish. The water commission to run. Hearts and minds still to change. But tonight was for celebration. For family, both blood and chosen. For the miracle of justice served at last. The ranch stood strong against the desert night. No longer a fortress against the world, but a beacon welcoming all who sought sanctuary. And at its heart, 3 people who'd refused to let hate win, who'd turned one night of love into a lifetime of courage. The verdict was in, the future was theirs to write. The rains came early that year, 1885, turning the desert green with promise. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the old cave, the place where everything had begun, watching water cascade past the entrance just as it had 10 years ago. But this time, she wasn't alone. This is where you met Papa? Victoria asked, exploring the cave with wonder. This is where we saved each other, Eleanor corrected gently. Sometimes that's how love works, 2 people pulling each other from different kinds of floods. Lincoln appeared at the cave mouth, water dripping from his hat. Trail's clear. We can head back whenever you're ready. They'd come here for the anniversary not of their wedding, but of that first night. A pilgrimage to the beginning. Now that they finally had an ending worth celebrating. Tell me again, Victoria said, settling beside her mother. Tell me the whole story. Eleanor smiled, pulling her daughter close. It was a night like this, thunder rolling, rain falling, and me foolish enough to travel alone with a wagon full of supplies. She told it all: the flood, the rescue, the night of shelter and unexpected connection. Victoria had heard pieces before, but never the whole truth, never with her father there to add his own memories. I thought she was stubborn, Lincoln interjected with a rare smile. Refused to admit she needed help even while the water tried to claim her. I thought he was dangerous, Eleanor countered, until he wrapped my wounds with hands gentler than any I'd known. And then you fell in love, Victoria asked with the directness of youth. Eleanor and Lincoln exchanged glances over their daughter's head. How to explain that kind of love to a child? The desperate, impossible, inevitable pull between 2 people who should never have met, much less touched. We found each other, Lincoln said simply. Sometimes that's all love is, finding the person who makes you whole. They returned to the ranch as the sun broke through the clouds, painting rainbows across the valley. The place had transformed in the months since the trial. New buildings rose beside the old A schoolhouse, a meeting hall, guest quarters for the families who came seeking sanctuary or just community. The Lincoln Ranch had become something neither Eleanor nor Lincoln had envisioned: a beacon for all those who didn't fit the territory's neat categories. Mixed families, single mothers, Apache scouts trying to find their place in a changing world, Mexican-American farmers fighting for their own land rights. They came for water, for work, for hope. Mrs. Lincoln. Young Frederick Douglass came running, one of the first students in their integrated school. Mrs. Lincoln, come quick, the new teacher's here. They'd hired her from back east Susan Anthony, a woman with fierce eyes and advanced ideas about education. She stepped from the stagecoach looking like she'd rather fight a bear than show weakness, despite the dust coating her traveling dress. Mrs. Lincoln. She extended a hand. I'm ready to scandalize the territory with radical notions like teaching all children to read. Eleanor liked her immediately. The school's opening was set for next week. They expected 20 students. 50 showed up, some traveling hours for the chance at education that didn't demand they abandon their heritage. We'll need more desks, Susan observed calmly, surveying the crowd. We'll build them, Isabella declared. She'd become the unofficial grandmother of the ranch, organizing everything with military precision and endless warmth. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, a table expanded many times to accommodate their growing household. Eleanor marveled at how far they'd come. Lincoln served on the Water Commission now, his voice carrying weight in decisions that had once been made in smoke-filled rooms by men like Carnegie. Eleanor ran the school board, fighting for funds and books and the radical idea that brown children deserved the same chances as white.
Mama,
Victoria said suddenly, I've been thinking about my name. Eleanor's fork paused. What about it? Victoria means victory, but whose victory? Yours, Papa's, mine. All of ours, Lincoln said quietly. Every person who fought for the right to exist as they are. Victoria nodded solemnly. Then I want to keep it, but I want to add something. Victoria Freedom Lincoln, because that's what we won, isn't it, freedom? Eleanor's eyes filled. Yes, my darling, that's exactly what we won. The week of the school opening brought unexpected visitors. Rockwell appeared first, hat in hand, seeking work. I know I don't deserve welcome, he said quietly, but I'm good with my hands, and I hear you're building. I'd like to build something better than I tore down. Lincoln studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. Ask old Pete, he'll put you to work. Even more surprising was the widow who arrived 2 days later, Carnegie's wife, dressed in black, looking aged beyond her years. I came to apologize, she said simply. I knew what he was. I stayed silent. That makes me complicit. She pulled out a leather portfolio. These are the deeds to his remaining properties. I'm signing them over to the families he hurt. It won't undo the damage, but perhaps it can help build something better. Eleanor accepted the papers with shaking hands. Why now? Because I have a daughter too, Mrs. Carnegie said quietly. And I want her to grow up in a world where she's valued for more than her ability to stay silent. The school opened on a crisp September morning. Parents gathered Apache, Mexican, Anglo, and every mixture in between. Some still looked uncertain, but they'd come. That was what mattered. Susan Anthony rang the bell, and children streamed in. Victoria helping the younger ones find seats. Eleanor watched from the doorway, Lincoln beside her, as their daughter moved between groups, translating languages, bridging differences with the ease of one born to it. She's going to change the world, Lincoln murmured. She already has, Eleanor replied. Just by existing, by refusing to be ashamed of who she is. Theodore Roosevelt had sent books from Washington, real books, not the cast-offs usually given to frontier schools. Clara Barton had used her connections to secure maps, slates, everything needed for proper education. No child will leave here believing they're less than anyone else, Susan declared, surveying her domain. I don't care if I have to fight the whole territory to ensure it. The months rolled by. Seasons turning, the school growing. Victoria emerged as a natural teacher herself, patient with the little ones, quick to defend anyone bullied for their differences. She moved between worlds: Apache lessons with her father, ranch management with her mother, Mexican cooking with Isabella, gathering skills like treasures. You know she'll leave someday, Lincoln said one evening, watching Victoria help younger students with their letters. This place won't be big enough for her forever. Eleanor's heart clenched, but she nodded. That's what we're preparing her for, isn't it, to go into the world whole and unashamed, to open doors we couldn't even approach? She might become anything: teacher, lawyer, doctor, president, Eleanor added with a smile. Why not, if we're dreaming big? Lincoln laughed, pulling her close. Our daughter. First Apache Anglo woman president? I like the sound of that. But for now, Victoria was still theirs, still young enough to climb into her mother's lap during thunderstorms, to beg stories from her father about the old ways, to believe the world could be changed by determined people with love in their hearts. The anniversary of the trial brought letters from across the territory, families writing to thank them, to share their own stories of acceptance found. Communities built. The Lincoln Ranch had become more than a place, it was a symbol, a possibility, a promise that different could also mean stronger. We should expand, Eleanor said, reading the latest request for sanctuary. Build more houses. Create a real community. A town, Lincoln raised an eyebrow. Why not a place where the law protects everyone equally? Where mixed families are normal, not notable? Where the school teaches all languages, all histories? Utopia in the desert. Not utopia, Eleanor corrected. Just a place where Victoria and children like her can grow up free, where love doesn't have to hide, where water flows to all who need it. They were standing by the creek, the same water that had brought them together now irrigating fields of corn and beans, supporting herds of cattle and sheep, nurturing gardens where Apache medicine plants grew alongside Mexican herbs and Eastern vegetables. Remember when you told me one night wasn't enough? Eleanor asked softly. Lincoln turned to face her, taking her hands. I was wrong. One night was everything. It gave us Victoria. It gave us the courage to fight for this life. It gave us each other, even across years of separation. But you came back, Eleanor said, echoing words that had haunted her for so long. You came back to claim my heart. No, Lincoln corrected gently. I came back to offer mine, to see if there was room in your life for a broken Apache scout who'd been too much a coward to fight for love the first time. There was room, Eleanor whispered. There was always room. Victoria found them there, racing up with news of a new family arriving, needing welcome and water and hope. As they walked back to the ranch together, their ranch, their home, their victory. Eleanor thought about the journey from that night in the cave to this moment of possibility. They'd fought Carnegie and won, faced down prejudice and survived, built something from nothing but determination and love. The territorial newspapers might call them an oddity, but here on their land, they were simply family. Mama, Victoria said as they reached the house, do you think there'll ever be a time when families like ours don't have to fight so hard just to exist? Eleanor looked at her daughter, brilliant, brave Victoria Freedom Lincoln, living proof that love could conquer hate, and smiled. I don't know, my darling. But I know this: every family that stands up, that refuses to hide, that claims their right to love and be loved, makes it easier for the next one. We're not just living our lives. We're clearing the trail for those who come after. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families seeking sanctuary, new battles for justice and acceptance. But tonight, they were together. Tonight, they were home. Eleanor touched the leather cord at her throat, no longer hidden, no longer a secret, just a reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. One night of love had grown into a lifetime of courage, a legacy of acceptance, a future bright with possibility. The desert wind carried the sound of children laughing, families gathering, communities building. And at the heart of it all, 3 people who'd refused to let the world tell them their love was wrong, who'd turned persecution into purpose, who'd proven that families were made of choice as much as blood. One night of love with the Apache, but he came back to claim her heart years later. And in claiming each other, they'd claimed the right for everyone to love freely, openly, proudly. The beginning had been a flood. The ending was a river steady, strong, nourishing all who came to its banks. The Lincoln Ranch stood ready for tomorrow, whatever it might bring. And in the old cave where it all began, water still flowed past the entrance, carrying their story downstream to inspire others waiting in their own floods for someone to pull them to safety, to love, to home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Please comment below and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Lincoln's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover this story of love, courage, and acceptance in the American frontier. Your support means the world and helps us bring more of these powerful historical stories to life.